Okay, hello students. Please be prepared to take notes on um, migration, the guided note sheet that I gave you earlier in class. So just to start us off, I believe that this is already typed on your guided note sheet, but migration, people move all the time. And it's important for you to know that people move at different scales. Now, we've talked more about geographic scale, so people move on a local scale to a global scale, but also people move on a temporal scale, meaning every single day we're moving around in what we will call activity spaces. And then we have some people who are moving maybe once in their lifetime. Okay, so there are different types or different scales for movement. And finally, all movement includes moving away from the home. So there are three different types of movement, and these are categorized according to the amount of time you are spent away from your home. So the first type is cyclic movement, and in your textbook, Rubenstein calls it circulation movement, but it's the same thing. The key word in cyclic movement is cycle. The other type of movement is periodic movement, and I like to think of periodic as like every now and then we're moving around. And again, we'll look more deeply in terms of like, well, how long is that? And then finally, most likely the type of movement that you're more familiar with is migration, which refers to permanent movement. So back to cyclic movement. You experience a short period of time away from home, and we're always returning back to home. This is part of like our daily type of movement, okay? And where we move, where we're going to create activity spaces. What I'd like for you to do right now is to take a couple moments to think about, okay, what are my activity spaces on an everyday basis? Where do I go? Where am I moving? Where do I spend most of my day? For some of you, it is most likely you leave home, then you go to school, maybe you have a job, maybe you go to a sports training, a sports event, and then you go back home, usually within that same day. Some examples of cyclic movement include commuting to and from work or to and from school. I put the seasonal movement in snowbirds as an example of cyclic movement. Um, that was a new term that I discovered, I learned about when I moved down here to Florida. I guess it's something that Floridians call northerners who come down to Florida during the winter seasons to escape like the horrible nor'easters and to experience the wonderful warm weather down here. So our snowbirds are an example of seasonal, are an example of cyclic movement. And then we also have an important term, nomadism. Like I have up there, it's less common but still found in parts of Asia and Africa. And hopefully you've heard of the term nomad or nomadism before, but these are people who are basically picking up and moving their home around with them. They are not just roaming around, okay, just not like saying, oh, where do we want to go today? There's definitely a purpose and a rhyme and reason for where they end up settling for that short amount of time and then relocating again. So let's go on to periodic movement. In periodic movement, we are still returning home, but we're spending a longer period of time away from home compared to cyclic movement. So examples include our migrant laborers. And an important term that we'll come across again in our agricultural unit is transhumance or transhumance. Okay, transhumance, it's a French word, so that's why I'm trying to say it with a French accent. I don't think I'm doing a good job. But transhumance is a system of pastoral farming where ranchers move their livestock according to the seasonal availability of pastures. And along with the ranchers and the livestock, again, we're having families moving as well. Okay. When our seniors go off to college, they will be experiencing periodic movement where from August, let's say from August to November, you're at college, you go home for Thanksgiving, then you go back to college, then December or winter break, you have December off and January off, and then you come back in the summertime. That's an example of periodic movement, and so is military service. So migration is a permanent movement of a home across significant distances. Usually we're moving from one country to another. And in the first chapter, you guys read about transnational corporations. That was a vocab word. Transnational migrant is very similar. Now we're having people who have homes and work in different countries, okay, and they find that balance between working and living in two different countries or nations. If we look at the key word in transnational, the word is trans, right? Between or across nations, okay? So you're a person who's moving across or between nations. Step migration is also pretty self-explanatory. When you are making this permanent move across significant distances, right, when you're migrating, it's not likely that you're going to make this large one-time move in one step. Instead, we do see people making smaller moves, smaller permanent movements to get to their final location. So that's what is meant by step migration. Migration usually consists of a series of stages. So you might have a peasant family who lives out in rural areas. They move to a village. They stay there for maybe a year or two. Then they're moving to a town. Then they're moving to a city. And finally, they get to a metropolis. Okay, so that's step migration. So now when we're talking about migration and moving around, there are two things that can get in your way, okay? So that's why I titled this slide, Get Out of My Way. We have intervening obstacles, and then we also have intervening opportunities. Intervening obstacles, key word is obstacle, something that stops you or gets in your way or alters your plans for moving. And obstacles usually have a negative connotation. So it's getting in your way because of negative factors. And there are many different types of intervening obstacles. Some examples include the physical environment, the actual distance and the cost it takes to travel from point A to point B, cultural factors. So if you are going to be moving to a different country, some things that people do consider is language and culture. And are there going to be people in that new country there that share the same culture as you, speak the same language, so on and so forth. And also government restrictions, okay? Such as government quotas, allowing a certain amount of people from a particular country to enter into a country. On the other side of that, we have something called intervening opportunities. And these are things that still get in your way, but it's a kind of like a good thing, okay? It kind of deters you from the first place that you wanted to go to. So intervening opportunity is the presence of a nearer opportunity that greatly diminishes the attractiveness of the sites farther away. And what we can also call these intervening opportunities is a term called place utility, where these other locations or these other sites offer new incentives or perks to try and pull people, and you've heard of push and pull factors, away from other sites into their own site. So an example that I have, and it's cut off on the screen here, but that's okay. Let's say you live in California and you plan to move to Florida, but along your way, you stop in North Carolina to see a friend, and you realize that North Carolina has a beautiful coastline and has better tax breaks for the business that you're trying to start. So instead of making your way all the way over to Florida, you have this new intervening opportunity, the wonderful coastlines of North Carolina, and you decide to stop and live in North Carolina and start your life there instead of going on to Florida. And then in class, you started a case study talking about the gravity model, okay? And it's really important that you grasp this idea of the gravity model when we're trying to figure out the patterns and, like it says there, the interaction between places, okay? I'm going to do a separate video about the case study because In class, I feel as if many of you rushed through and weren't able to actually sit down and see and think about the gravity model and really grasp what the objectives of this case study were. Okay, so I'm going to do a separate video. I strongly encourage you to do that. If you don't decide to watch the video, then don't forget to answer the questions at the end, whether you've watched the video or not. There are questions on the last page of the case study that I've given you. Okay, so I hope you have a good rest of your evening or afternoon. Bye-bye.